Singapore likes to do what's right? We know that that's our responsibility as a citizen, as an individual, as a corporate citizen, as a global citizen. When we have resources, we have surplus, we're going to put aside so that this generation will start to pay for the future generation and not load all the costs. As a GRC, we want to serve the residents better. You know that they are watching my hairstyle. I think the men don't get that. I really admire people who have that very strong guidance in their value system and persistence, determination to move things.
We're back with another episode of The Usual Place, and joining me as a co-host for this episode is Audrey Tan, Assistant News Editor at the Straits Times, who oversees coverage of environment issues. Now, she's also the podcast host of Green Pals. Now, Audrey, you have a special interest in how Southeast Asia is affected by climate change and nature loss. Now, if you had to narrow it down, what is one area you think people should be paying more attention to now?
So I think mitigation efforts, which is action that we can take to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we put into the atmosphere, is still very important. But given the global geopolitical climate where you have large emitters like the US backsliding on their climate action, I think it's also timely that we focus now more on building our adaptive capabilities, which is how can we protect people from the impacts of climate change. So for countries like Singapore, it will be how can we protect our coastlines from rising sea levels? How can we protect people, especially vulnerable segments of the community, from rising temperatures? So this resilience, whether at the national or at the individual level, I think it's something that we should talk a lot more about now.
Actually, I'm very scared when the climate conversation talks about it's very hot and it's like very cold some days, So I guess it kind of like ties into the big conversations about the environment happening right now, and in particular about what Singapore is planning to do to shore up our protection against climate change. Which brings me to my guest today, Minister for Sustainability and Environment, Grace Fu, who is dropping by after the Committee of Supply debates. Minister, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming by to talk about the ministry's
Thank you so much for having me. It's quite a nice, cozy place.
So, Min-Fu, I think one thing that came across through this year's budget was how committed Singapore is to climate action, right? Even on the mitigation front, I think we have announced quite ambitious targets.
Yeah.
And I think in during our ministries, in your series of announcements, there's a lot of adaptation efforts as well. Maybe can you just share your thoughts on, Singapore's commitment to persevering on climate action despite, what we're reading about globally?
Yeah, so if I were to explain climate action to the aunties at the hawker center, I will usually say this. I will say that, imagine somebody putting on layers and layers of blankets on you. They're worried that you're cold, so they take on blankets. And now you have something like 50 layers of blankets on you, and you're starting to sweat profusely. You're starting to get a fever. That's exactly what's happening to planet Earth. Because of our mission from the moment that we discovered steam engine and having locomotive that's crisscrossing around the world, carbon dioxide has been, or greenhouse gases has actually been accumulating. So obviously, if the US is backsliding, if other countries are finding the air cover from the US, we are just going to add a lot more layers. But there are already 50 layers on us. So looking at our Singapore Green Plan, we know that we need to do two things. Slow down the rate of putting the layers, and at the same time, starts to adapt, help ourselves adapt. So at the same time, when you're saying that, reduce greenhouse gas, but we also know we already have 50 layers on us. It's going to take a long while for us to remove those layers, and we need to adapt. So we need to look at potential outcome would be maybe there's going to be some sea level rise. Maybe the weather is going to be, like you, Natasha, sometimes hot, sometimes too cold, sometimes too rainy. So how do we adapt and get the resilience? So for this budget, we know that we're not just going to deal with, momentary decision on the US part. Even if the US decide one way or another, it's not going to resolve or going to accelerate the problem that we have overnight. So we still need to keep our eyes on mitigation. We still need to look at how to reduce our carbon dioxide, how to improve our energy efficiency, do more economic activities, do more human activities with less fossil and therefore less carbon emission, less footprint on the planet. Still looking at how to adapt to a warmer world that is going to be with us for a while. So that's really how we're looking at it.
I think people who are listening to this might see, or Singaporeans in particular who are listening to this, I mean, to follow up on this conversation, we are a very small red dot compared to the US. I think maybe some people watching this might say, how does what we do change anything in the larger conversation?
Oh, absolutely right. I mean, we are a very small emitter in the overall scheme of things. You know, whether we reduce or not, it's not going to really, move the needle. But we always think that Singapore likes to do what's right, right? We know that that's our responsibility as a citizen, as an individual, as a corporate citizen, as a global citizen. And also we see that when we start applying our minds, we sometimes can find innovative solutions in Singapore. Just take water as an example. We started to look at water security 3 decades ago. There wasn't any technology out there. But because we persevered, we innovate, we find engineering solution, we were able to find, membranes to recycle water and make economic sense for it. Increasingly, solutions like this is going to mean a lot in a warmer world in many other parts of the world. So we're starting to see Singapore companies using the solution that we've developed over the decades and moving out of the country into the rest of the world. Not just, finding the growth economically, but actually the social impact around the region. So we like to see that again also in climate change. The world needs many solutions because climate is impacting us in many ways. We're going to adapt, for example, through coastal protection. So we are putting, sort of R&D into understanding how we can do that better so that some of these engineering solutions can actually apply to cities around the region. Already you're talking about some major cities like Jakarta, Bangkok, for example, Kuala Lumpur also inundated from time to time. So are they looking for such solutions? Do our businesses have the opportunity to also bring their competency and their engineering solutions there? This is where I think an area of green growth can be found.
Climate change is an issue that cuts across many industries and ministries. So as the MSC Minister and also Minister in charge of trade relations, can you share with us what are the key areas Singapore is looking at on the climate mitigation and adaptation front?
I think the first part really, if you look at our carbon emission, the first part is really to find renewable energy. So we do that by, deploying solar panels, wherever we can find space, whether it's at rooftop, reservoir, water bodies, or even, empty land, we find ways to deploy them. But there's also a certain limit because we are limited by our size. So we need to explore new areas, new sources of renewable energy. And that's probably coming from importation. So MTI is really, going out, having a number of conditional approval, conditional license to import energy. A lot of work is being done. A lot of work needs to be done some more to bring some of these, plans into fruition. It's about connecting us with places where there's renewable energy potential. So areas where there's large area or areas where there's hydropower, maybe we can tap some of these green energy onto Singapore. And when we have enough connectivity, that's going to result in a more resilient grid, So if you have a place that is down, perhaps maybe, because it's not getting enough rain, so hydro is low, you will have solar in another country that can sort of augment and compensate. A regional grid will give us the resilience that we need. So to get there, you can imagine that the amount of engineering work, power cable laying, and a lot of project management, a lot of project financing that's going to need it to get there. The second area, which is really important for us right now, is really energy efficiency. So we can swap the composition of energy sources. We can swap it fossil to renewable. But if we can reduce the amount of energy that's needed, we can actually need to swap less. We can, reduce less. We can have smaller impact in the environment. How do we do that? From basically using less energy, switching off the lights, something that's simple as that, to really changing to more energy efficient appliances, to really reconfiguring your processes so that you use less electricity, use less resources. Right? So we are encouraging companies to adopt that thinking. Sometimes as simple things like putting a sensor to know that if you have no workers in the building, you can switch off the lights. So energy facility management is a big part. to really encouraging building owners to swap out their, sort of older chillers for the newer ones where it's energy efficient. That can actually cut across the entire, population. Household as well. We have climate-friendly household vouchers that's expanded both in terms of quantity as well as coverage. So $300 to $400, also from HDB flats to private property owners as well. It's really to encourage, households to think about swapping electrical appliances from something that perhaps, need replacement, that's older, that doesn't have energy efficiency of the current appliances, and to something that maybe costs a little more. The voucher is used to offset that. But in the long run, the payback in the form of lower utility bill is going to be maybe 2 to 3 years. It makes sense. And when you do that, the household does that, the factory does that, office building does that. Collectively, actually, we can reduce, the energy that's needed. So a few other ways, electrification. EV is a very big way, right? From ICE, which is using diesel or petrol, to EV, we are talking about reduction of 40%. Because a lot of wastage in just turning up the engine, having that heat and sound coming from ICE cars. When you electrify it, actually it's a halving of the energy that's needed. We're also looking at buses and trucks. So that's an announcement as well, the MOT side, to encourage adoption of electric truck, heavy vehicle, and also encouraging, businesses to install charging points for heavy vehicles, because these two got to come together. If you don't have the charging infrastructure, it doesn't give the people the assurance that you can charge your trucks or buses when you need them. It's not going to work. So we need both infrastructure as well as incentive for operators to go electric. So when you do that and you go all the way down to generators, sometimes you have this leaf blower that's using diesel, but say change it to electric. Every one of that move is going to bring down your energy usage. It's going to increase your efficiency and reduce your carbon footprint. So that's many things that we can do on the mitigation side.
So, Minister, I think I was very glad to see Singapore's commitment to tackling climate change. We have a 2035 climate target to reduce our emissions from 60 million tons in 2030, 45 to 50 by 2035. So that's kind of like a linear trajectory to reaching net zero by 2050. So I think many people in the climate space in Singapore really appreciated that. But of course, there's also a group who would say, ultimately, Singapore contributes 0.1% to global emissions. And we are reading every day about how, the US is scaling back on their climate plans, and they are the world's second largest emitter. So given this, do you think that we need to focus more on adaptation instead?
Well, as I used that example earlier on, right? So when US scaled back on their sort of, they call it Inflation Reduction Act, but actually incorporated in that act, there were many incentives for green businesses and so on. In the near term, it's actually not going to move the needle too much as well. Because if you think about it, it says, okay, I'm going to give up on solar. I'm going to drill, right? There's a certain capacity limitation. Because if you think about power generation, the capacity is there in the near term. So you can use more gas, but to really make that step, you need to invest in new capacity. Coal, for example. You need to build new coal plants. We've seen them sort of extending the lives of coal plants, but we haven't seen them really building coal plant in a big way, right? So I think the move, yes, less incentive, but businesses will be wary if it's the right time to really invest in the dirtiest form of power generation. Because there's a lot of, businesses are also worried, if I invest and this is going to be 20, 30 years, are there going to be changes down the line, right? So in the near term, I think the businesses will not respond straight away. Of course, when the US are taking that position, they are also a very major financial hub around the world. That's going to take the signal down. You have seen, for example, some of the investors, the private equity and the major fund managers are also scaling back on their ESG commitment. That's not a very good sign. But we want to, that's where I think there's a lot of work that we need to do at the industry level, at the finance level, at the provincial, state level to keep the attention on climate action. Even with US taking this stance, as I mentioned earlier on, we still have many layers of blankets on us. Do we need to suddenly move the adaptation to think that, okay, instead of 50 layers on us, we're going to think about 100 layers? I think not yet. Because the rate of increase is not going to move too quickly. But we need to get at least up to a level when we think that, okay, the most likely outcome of climate change is going to happen, and we have to, really be serious with our adaptation. So whether it's on heat, whether it's on coastal protection, whether it's on water security or food security, we need to keep our eyes on our plans and keep at it. When there's a lack of leadership in one area, we like to think that humanity has the wisdom to find leadership elsewhere, whether it's at the business, whether it's in the banking sector, whether it's in the NGO people sector. I believe we will have some innovation and some leadership emerging.
So other than, just going back to the budget announcements, maybe you can just give us some cliff notes about the adaptation related announcements from your ministry.
So it's actually quite important for us in this budget to also see that this budget is really not about near-term cost of living issue. Of course, that's an important part because I think we have had inflation for the last 2 years. But actually, many aspects of the budget is about getting ourselves ready for the long term. So in the area of sustainability, the Coastal Protection Fund of 5 billion going in is a very clear sign that when we have resources, we have surplus, we're going to put aside so that this generation will start to pay for the future generation and not load all the costs only when, 30 years later, when our children or our grandchildren are paying the taxes for it. So it's about putting aside when we can and start to get ready to build a sort of coastal protection facility. And over there, it's not just the fund, it's also about some plans to undertake studies. So we're looking at Sentosa, for example, to think about how to protect it. And sometimes in budget, it seems very dry. Okay, Sentosa is included in this coastal protection plan. What does it mean? But if you really think about possibilities, like East Coast, you had this Long Island solution that not only give us coastal protection feature, but creating a very, very significant stretch of land that offers us new possibility in residential, in recreation, in industry, in economy, in buildings. That's really something quite exciting. Sentosa, similarly, I think warrants our attention to look for innovative solution. What can we do to keep the nature of Sentosa being really, a place where a bit out of the mainland, where you can relax, you can enjoy the beach, you can get in close touch with nature, and also, you can enjoy a very rustic life in Sentosa. And yet, having the assurance that it has a resilience against tidal, rise. So that's a very interesting part, I think, in our plan.
We are already experiencing the impacts of climate change now, right? We are having a monsoon surge now, and I think climate projections are that rainfall could become more erratic, more intense sometimes due to climate change. So what do you think this means for individual resilience?
Sometimes it's about, infrastructure, protecting yourselves. So for example, if your house is in a low-lying area, you may think about either raising your protection, raising a barrier to protect your property. If you're going to get, if you're a preschool and you have many young children and you're facing sort of hotter days, how do you protect yourselves? Maybe you need to look at air conditioning at the appropriate time. You can do it in a very energy efficient way. Air conditioning plus mechanical ventilation together works very well for the climate. If you are a company that has to deal with, sort of changing temperature, what do you do to, again, give yourselves the resilience? How do you protect your workers from a very hot day outdoor? Is it something that you can do with arranging the time of work? Is that something that you can do to advise them to take breaks, If there's something that they can wear, for example, hats that they can wear that can protect them from, from shade them from the sun. These are all things, sort of infrastructure, protective measures that you can take as a company. What we can do also is to give them better information, give everyone better information. If we're going to tell you that, hey, the next few days is going to be fairly hot, please watch weather forecasts before you undertake your outdoor activity. If we're going to have prolonged period of, dry, hot days, what can you do to adjust your work, adjust your activity? Better information empower us to make decisions for ourselves. If you're going for an outing, maybe you want to go somewhere that's more shaded than really outdoor. Maybe you want to have more hats, sunscreen to protect yourselves. So it's really to make each one of us more aware of what we can do to protect ourselves and our families.
Actually, I forgot to wear sunscreen. Now that you mentioned it, I was like, oh, okay. Actually, that's a very good, important tip, right? Everyone should put on more sunscreen. Then.
Yeah, we don't put out enough hats, If you look at it,
Japan.
something, that's right, hat and something to protect your neck as well from really, exposure to UV as well as just the heat.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about hawker culture because it also came up during your ministry's COS debate, right? So I understand that there are already different schemes in place to support the hawker trade, such as, rental support. I think there was a $600.
And that's an SG60 gift to our hawkers to recognize them for their contribution.
So that'll be this year. And there's also changes to the manpower policy as well. Yeah. But, hawkers still have to deal with long working hours,
Absolutely.
maybe, profit margins might decrease because of, higher cost of goods and perhaps not the best working conditions because they cannot work from home. They have to be in their stalls. What is MSC's plan for the longevity of the trade? Maybe to attract younger people to join. Yeah.
So actually what you have just mentioned is really part of the adjustments as we go. We know that, the hawkers culture is very much part of Singaporean culture, right? I mean, if you ask many Singaporeans, what do you do after you come back from a trip? Most of the time you hear that, before you reach home, you go and get your prata fix or you get your bak chor mee fix at the airport. It's just what we want. But we also know that it's a very hard work, right, as a hawker. First of all, you're self-employed. There's no certainty. You can't take hospitalization or medical leave with pay. Hawker is pretty much, if you stop working, you don't get paid. And it's hard physical work as well. Many of them, on their feet for 8-10 hours of a day. And if you're aging, if you're elderly, that's even harder. So we want to, in a way, welcome and, introduce more young people to the trade. We give them either a incubation program when if they want to start up in the trade, they can, lower the cost by taking over a store that already has some fit outs so they don't have to invest in the fittings. We want them to go through some training with some of the experts. So there's a training program for them. And also we have one we call a hawker succession program. So if the elderly hawker, very well established, very good trade and delicious food coming from the store, if he's retiring, if you'd like to pass it on to someone, we try to match that and have a young hawker to learn it from him. So really various ways to lower the barrier of entry. So we have also made some adjustments to the rental policy. Now, actually, there's no reserve rent. So if you have a store that, has a $1 rent, we will let it go at $1. So you can get it as low as you want. Really allowing, new hawkers to come in to start the trade. Having said that, it's also looking at the infrastructure that allow the hawker trade to be easier. So, for example, the newer hawker centers, you see higher ceiling, almost like double ceiling, big mechanical fan, so that it's cooler. It's cooler for the store as well. One of the problems with our older centers is that, first of all, it's quite low ceiling. Secondly, the cooling is done through small fans that's directed at the hawkers. And the hawkers will say, when you have this fan that's blowing at me, the gas stove is off. So sometimes they say, direct it this way, that way, and then they get very hot, right? And then also the ventilation is actually limited by sort of the mechanical ducting that we have. So how do we improve so that it has a longevity and currency and relevance for the hawkers to also age in the trade? Some of our patrons are also getting on in age. They need barrier-free accessibility. They're on wheelchair. They need greater space for the wheelchair. So these are all the infrastructure improvement that we're looking at this new hawker center upgrading and plan that we have. We're setting aside $1 billion because over the next 3 decades or so, we need to really look at where the hawker centers are located. The hawkers were, as you all know, hawker centers started when we resettled hawkers from the street. And many of them were just around the older towns because that's where we were in the 70s. But as we built new towns, we have new BTOs, we have new towns coming up, then you see that actually the population has migrated. The hawker centers have not really caught up. So you'll find more hawker centers down south near the center, fewer in the further places. So we need to take a complete relook at that, build new ones to serve new communities. At the same time, look at how we can improve on the existing one, on the older ones, to be relevant and current with the needs of the residents around. Some older towns you have seen rejuvenation, new BTO coming in to take over the older flats. But with that, the demography has actually reduced in age. Younger couples coming in, they will need breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Because we don't cook.
You don't
Yes.
cook.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, generally they have a breakfast and then they will cook they will have dinner at home. So with that change, the need to have hawker centers sort of serving 3 meals has actually increased. And the older centers that only operate for 2 meals of the day are really not sufficient in serving the residents' needs. So we need to look at how to improve it and upgrade it over time.
Actually, one of my biggest takeaways from the debate was that 2024 was designated as the Year of Public Hygiene. That shocked me because I was like, what? Because you said that actually there have been commendable outcomes that have come out from that, right? But actually, how can we make Singaporeans more civic-minded without the need to constantly have fines or guidelines?
Well, we do need both public education as well as enforcement because we are a population that actually comprises of a large transient population. If you look at the population of Singapore, about, I think, a quarter or maybe 20% are foreign workers, tourists that come and go. And each time when the new ones come here, we need to actually re-educate. We need to establish what is a social norm of the society. It's just like, when you get to the MRT station, do you stand on the left or the right? Right? So if you're gathering, having a chat with your friends in the garden, it's expected of you to pack up all your litter and put in a bin. So you need to have both public education so that people, when they come in, they sort of know that, okay, that's the norm, but also reinforce with, enforcement and inspection. So with these two, we're hoping to get the norm, the social norming done faster. Having said that, we're also looking at how to help operators, whether it is a cleaning industry or coffee shop, hawker centers that have upkeep public toilets to do their job better. Very often, we view in Singapore is quite unique in the sense that if you are in other cities like New York or Tokyo, it's very hard to find. Well, maybe not Tokyo, New York and London. It's very hard to find public toilets. And if you need to go to the toilet, unless you're a patron of a coffee house or eatery, you generally don't just go in and use the toilets only. But in Singapore, you know that, coffee shops everywhere, it's actually making the toilets available. You don't have to be a patron. It's almost like a public toilets, but offered by private operators. So they do fulfill a community role, particularly in the communities when many of the retirees would gather and, have their coffee for several hours. They do have very significant footfall coming in and out. And their scale is not so large that they can have a dedicated cleaner. So we need to help them to put in place a cleaning regime, train their cleaners, and also have the cleaning infrastructure. Similarly, we looked at how we can upgrade the cleaning industry as well. Already we have been doing, working with them quite a lot. from food safety to cleaning. We want them to appoint a dedicated officer to look at and ensuring a certain regime. If you are in food business, if you are in cleaning business, you have a certain program to undertake your cleaning, you undertake your food preparation, and you need someone with the skill sets to now do it, in a more systematic way, a more scientific way. It's really to uplift the skills of the industries.
So, Minister, now that budget season is over, we are, however, in general election season, right?
Yes.
Many people are anticipating the GE to come
I
around
thought I
soon.
can get away with that.
Well, since we have you here, we must ask.
So, I mean, there are many issues that are expected to be discussed during the upcoming GE, cost of living and so on. But what do you think climate and environmental issues, how do you think these issues will feature in the upcoming GE? Do you think this is an issue that voters care about?
In many other countries and jurisdiction, very often environmental issues are election issues. If you have lack of clean water, you have water stoppage for regularly prolonged period of time. It's not unusual to see some communities having to get their plastic pail ready because water is going to be stopped for a while maintenance takes place. Or if you're going to have the flood stopping you from going to school for weeks or damaging your house extensively, repeatedly, these are environmental issues that often become election issues. But this is sometimes, I count my blessing being in Singapore that actually from the work that has been done by generations of ministers before me, that we have actually laid a very good foundation. We have been expanding our drainage capacity. We have been investing in building new drains, wider drains, deeper drains. We have been, building up dams so that we can have some coastal protection, flood protection functions in them. So I think we are in a good position to remove some of these issues away from the election because people are not being bothered by the outcomes. But we can never be sure because, if you have a successive period of intense rain that climate change is going to come, it may become an issue.
You are also an MP for Yuhua SMC,
Yes.
which has now been absorbed into part of Jurong East-Bukit Batok GRC. So what do you think are the expectations of residents on the ground? This new group representation constituency also does not really have an anchor minister at the moment. So what are you hearing from residents on the ground now?
Well, the expectation is that, obviously that being incumbent, they'll be involved in the GRC. The GRC is also in a position to absorb, a lot more of the residents because if you look at how population has shifted in Yuhua and in Jurong Central, for example, these are older towns. The children of the residents, the original residents, have moved out, the newer towns. So actually, the number of voters have been declining. But across the town, you have new towns like Tengah, you have new towns like Bukit Batok West, and they are growing very quickly. So actually, residents there deserve better attention. Right now, the ratio of MP to residents is just so high, right? Although we have very hardworking MP there, but it's just not even. So we need to even that out. I need to take on more load. So I think that's what we intend to do. As a GRC, we want to serve the residents better. We want to look at how we can draw resources from each of the division so that we can support this growing population better, absorbing them in terms of schools, preschool centers, CCs, transportation nodes, for example. These are all areas where we can find synergies within the GRC to serve the residents of every division.
So since the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee issued their report, how have you been engaging with residents?
Obviously, I have to address the changes because in my division, for example, part of it has been, redrawn into Jurong Central. Resident has been calling me and say, why? So I have to explain to them the cause of this change. At the same time, assure them that, we will have a proper handover and that takes place. assure them that I will brief incumbent properly as of the existing program so that we hope that there's some continuity. But also I need to sort of understand the GRC better. 4 out of the 5 divisions belong to the same town council. So we're talking about Bukit Batok East, and Clementi and Yuhua. Actually, we have regular meetings because we have the same set of employees that help us manage the municipal issues. So we're fairly familiar with one another. I can't say that I'm totally au fait, but I have familiarity and I do meet the community leaders regularly. Hong Kong North, on the other hand, is an area that I'm less familiar with. So I think over the next few weeks, I have to catch up. I have to be updated. I have to get myself, familiar with the landscape, the topography, where are the hawker center, where's the coffee shops, and what are the issues that the residents are having. That's, I think, my job over the next few weeks.
So you've actually been in politics for almost 2 decades.
Yeah, that's right.
2006,
Yeah,
right?
2006, yeah.
Okay. How have you seen things change for women in politics over the last 20 years?
Well, I think that when I joined politics, women in politics was an issue. So we get asked a lot, right? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about being first minister to helm the ministry? How do you feel being one of the 3 ministers, for example, women ministers? But increasingly, I think that's less of an issue because there's greater acceptance by the residents. They don't make gender that much of an issue. I rarely have people coming up to say, why do I get a woman MP, for example?
Do people tell you that?
No, not at all.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Okay. So, but
in the past,
to.
yes. Yeah. In the past, we would have to deal with that, or from whether it is gender, both direction. Sometimes you get asked as well. And the grassroots leaders, the agencies, the shop merchant association, for example, they sometimes have this gender element perception in their mind. So we need to prove ourselves that we are able to do the job just as men could do. So I think there's less of an issue now. We get asked less, which is good.
Are there still any
attention? I think should be on individuals' capability rather than the gender that we have.
Are there any downsides? Now you said that it's changed quite a bit, but are there any downsides to being a woman in politics? Maybe still.
The downside, or rather the hindrance, is still the same. Very often, I think our family, the role in the family, familiar roles, as well as societal roles, still remain to be more caregiver. If your child is sick, very often, the women MP have to make adjustments, for example. It's not because the family expect us, but because we want to do that as a mother, as a wife. So we still have to do a lot of balancing. I think that's not changed. The spotlight on women in politics remain to be different, I think. I think the men seldom get sort of feedback on how they dress, how they look on camera, I think.
What are people saying to you? What are people saying to you about your dressing?
Oh, it's like, your hairstyle has changed. By that, you know that they are watching my hairstyle. I think the men don't get that. Yeah, so the spotlight is slightly different. How you dress, how you carry yourself matter more, I think. Yeah.
So you've been at MSC for the last 5 years, since 2020, right? And you've engaged with many people from all walks of life in the industry, in Singapore and around the world, in the sustainability and environmental sector. Now, is there someone who's particularly inspired you along the way?
I think there are several. In the international arena, he's now the Canadian Premier, Mark Carney. I think what I admire him was really being a leader in the finance sector, to get all the central bankers together to basically have standards, have an association, and then plans to decarbonize the banking system. That is so impactful. Because if the regulator, if the MAS says that now there's a certain timeline for you to get out of, kind of the GHG emitting industry, get out of coal, for example, that's going to be listened and listened carefully by all the banks that they regulate. And banks, through finance, through capital, has a very significant impact on companies. I think Ravi Menon has done a very good job, our ambassador for climate. He basically took over the decision that Mark has led, and he ran the Association for Central Bankers for a couple years, and again laid the foundation for agreements between central bankers and to have some taxonomy in place. In Singapore, I think we have people that is like Esther Ang, who started the sustainability journey 2 decades ago.
3 decades, I think.
3 decades ago.
Yeah.
So when it wasn't fashionable at all, she was at it. She kept at it. She was moving, the company. She was moving the industry. She was really playing a critical role in greening our buildings, locally as well as internationally. So she's really flying the flag high for us, for Singaporeans, for the built environment. So these are people that I think provided the leadership consistently and showing the pathway and continue to always make progress. I mean, Esther is still thinking about what to do next. Ravi is still at it to try to get more companies, more banks, to get on to decarbonization. So I really admire people who have that very strong guidance in their value system and persistence, determination to move things. And we need these leaders, for sustainability.
Since we're talking about environment and sustainability, I have to ask you, as MSE Minister, what is the most green thing you do and what's the least green thing you do?
Personally?
Yeah.
The most green, oh dear. I think
Bringing your own
impact-wise...
cup.
No, I think I changed the EV in terms of personal impact, right, on my carbon footprint. When I travel, I will buy a carbon credits if it's SQ. Do you know that, after you booked your SQ tickets, right at the end, they will ask you, are you prepared to offset? So generally, if I'm flying on my own account, I would do that. But personally, my personal trips will have that offset. To the smallest things, like bring the own cup, I climb the stairs because I'm the 24th floor. My meetings sometimes on the 23rd, sometimes on the 25th. So I don't use internal lift that much. I tend to just climb up and down. I think these are the things that I do. At home, for example, recycling, separating the waste. Quit soap. Soap.
The bar soap.
Yeah, because if you look at the volume, you look at the weight versus body soap, it's so much water in there that's being transported around from manufacturing factory to the shop to the home, carrying water around. So if you reduce that, actually you save energy that's needed in the transportation.
I totally never thought of it. Yeah. I just never thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would think about the plastic waste that it comes in as well.
Yeah, and it's so much cheaper, a soap compared to a body soap. So much cheaper.
Is there a non-green thing that you do that you want to change eventually?
Non-green thing. Well, I don't have solar panel yet in my home. That's something that I think I will install when I have the chance. I think that's about it.
That's the biggest change you want to do in your life for the environment.
Yeah, well, I would say that actually, because if you look at our footprint, it's really about the energy that we consume, right? So changing your electrical appliances, reducing usage. I already do not use aircon all the time. I use air conditioning maybe, 50 days in a year, thereabouts, and I use it sparingly. So...
more to come with your habits. Well, Minister, on that note, thank you very much for coming on the usual place.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
No worries. Yeah. I hope you'll come back again when you have more updates to share.
If you invite me, I'll be here.
I'll be calling you.
Sure.
As we inch closer to the 2025 general election, you can expect hot takes and these one-on-one conversations with MPs or ministers on the usual place. So if you don't want to miss out, like, subscribe or hit the notification bell on YouTube to get fresh content. Now you can also catch me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or on the ST app. I'll see you next time at the usual place.